I've always told myself that the internet is just a mirror, a digital surface that reflects the light we feed it and nothing more. We like to think we are the masters of the scroll, the kings of the click. But there is a specific kind of silence that exists in the corners of the web where the light doesn't. Right. It's a heavy, static-filled quiet that tastes like copper and old dust. You've probably felt it before, haven't you? That sudden, irrational chill when a page takes a second too long to load. Or when you find a link that shouldn't be clickable, yet it glows with a dull, sickly invitation. They tell us never to wander off the path, to stay within the walled gardens of the sites we know. Because the dark web isn't just a place for illicit trades. It's a graveyard for things that refused to die. I found one of those things last night. It started as a joke, a late-night deep dive into the archives of a forum that supposedly went dark back when the world was still tethered by dial-up tones and chunky monitors. It was called Archive 9. Most of the regulars who talk about these things say the site was scrubbed by a government agency or a corporate cleanup crew after something went wrong in a server room in Nevada. But the link I found didn't lead to a 404 error. It didn't lead to a dead end. Instead, it led me to a thread that felt like a pulse under my fingertips. A thread that was still updating. Before I tell you what I saw, I need you to promise me something. If you see a notification icon appear on your screen while you're listening to this, even if it's just a flickering light in the corner of your eye, don't check it. Not yet. Because once you acknowledge the update acknowledges you. We're going to walk through this together, but you need to understand that some secrets aren't meant to be unearthed, and some threads are woven with more than just code. They are woven with the very things we try to forget when the lights go out. I shouldn't be sharing this. My hands are still shaking as I speak. But if I'm going down this rabbit hole, I can't be the only one who knows the truth. Are you ready to see what's behind the curtain? Because once we start, the refresh button becomes the most dangerous tool in your house. It's funny how the most life-altering moments usually begin in the most aggressively mundane settings. I wasn't in a dark basement or a high-tech surveillance van. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the wood scarred by years of coffee rings and accidental scratches, illuminated by the hum of a flickering fluorescent bulb that I've been meaning to replace for 3 months. The air smelled like stale popcorn and the lingering scent of rain coming through the cracked window. My world was small, safe, and entirely boring. I was just another bored soul surfing the digital waves looking for a thrill that didn't involve a subscription fee. That's when I stumbled upon the reference to Archive 9 in an old, dusty subreddit dedicated to dead internet theories. At first, my inner skeptic was screaming. I've seen enough lost media hoaxes to know the drill. Usually, it's just a bored teenager with a basic understanding of HTML trying to start a Creepypasta. I expected a broken link or a parked domain covered in spam ads for crypto bots. But when I clicked that hidden hyperlink buried in a string of nonsense text, the browser didn't hang. The screen didn't go white. Instead, the UI of Archive 9 bled onto my monitor like an oil slick. It was jarringly primitive, charcoal gray backgrounds, sharp white text, and no images. It looked like a fossil from the era of Netscape, a digital ghost that had somehow survived the great purging of the early web. There were no except cookies banners, no tracking pixels, just a raw, unyielding interface that felt cold to the touch. I leaned back, the plastic of my chair creaking under my weight, and let out a short, cynical laugh. Nice aesthetic, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded thin against the backdrop of the city traffic outside. I felt superior to the mystery. I felt like an observer at a Museum of Dead Ideas. I scrolled through the main directory, and that's when I noticed the anomalies. Archive 9 wasn't just a site for weird stories, it was an aggregator of lost threads from forums that had been shut down by court orders or sudden server failures. Names like the Black Box Whispering Pines and the Static Chamber were listed in a grim index. Most of them were grayed out, stone cold dead. But at the very bottom, tucked away like a secret, was a link. Titled Thread 404, The Open Door. Next to the title, a small green light was pulsing. In the world of 2004 web design, that meant a user was currently active. My skepticism took its first real hit. This site was supposed to be an archive of the abandoned, a digital tomb. Finding a live user here was like walking into a mausoleum and hearing someone humming a tune. I checked the last updated column, expecting it to be a glitch, a frozen timestamp from 15 years ago. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest when I saw the numbers. Jan 7, 2026, 10:31 a.m. That was exactly 1 minute ago. The normalcy of my kitchen, the half-empty water bottle, the stack of unpaid bills, the sound of my neighbor's dog barking in the distance suddenly felt like a thin veil. I felt a sudden, sharp urge to close the laptop and walk away. There is a specific kind of FOMO that doesn't involve missing a party or a sale. It's the fear of missing the moment the world reveals its teeth. If I closed the tab now, I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I had brushed against something truly impossible. I told myself it was just a sophisticated bot, or maybe a dedicated group of role players keeping a legend alive. I convinced myself that there was a logical, boring explanation behind that pulsing green light. But as I moved my cursor toward the link, my hand felt heavy, as if the air in the room had suddenly gained mass. I clicked. I shouldn't have, but I did. Because the only thing more terrifying than the unknown is the thought of being the only person who had a chance to see it and chose to stay in the dark. The page began to load, and for a split second, the reflection in my monitor wasn't mine. It was just a dark, empty hallway. That didn't exist in my apartment. Then the text appeared. The page loaded with a jarring, mechanical snap. There were no banners, no ads, just a stark black and white interface that looked like a digital obituary. At the very top, the header read, Thread 404, subject, the open door status, active. I felt a strange prickle at the base of my neck. In forum shorthand, a thread started in 2004 shouldn't be active. It should be archived, locked, or deleted. But the active status flickered in a sickly neon green, as if the website itself was breathing. I scrolled down to the very first post. It was dated November 14, 2004 at 3:14 a.m. The user's handle was still here, and their avatar was a simple, low-resolution square of static. The post began with a casual, almost breezy tone that felt hauntingly out of place given the context. Still Here wrote, "Hey guys, long-time lurker, first-time poster. I'm writing this because I think I'm going crazy, and I need someone to tell me I'm just hearing things. You know how old houses have their own language. The pipes moan, the floorboards creak, the wind whistles through the attic vents. I've lived in this place for 6 years, and I thought I knew every syllable of its vocabulary. But tonight, the house started speaking a language I don't recognize." I leaned closer to the screen, the blue light washing over my face. The contrast was sharp. Outside my window, a car alarm chirped, and the distant hum of the city felt solid and real. But on the screen, a 20-year-old voice was describing a silence so thick it felt like physical weight. Still Here continued. It started in the basement. I was sitting in the living room, watching a rerun of some sitcom, trying to ignore the fact that the radiator was acting up again. Then I heard it. A rhythmic, wet thumping coming from directly beneath my feet. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't a rodent. It sounded like someone was dropping a heavy, waterlogged carpet onto the concrete floor over and over again. Thump, drug, thump, drug. As I read the words, I found myself holding my breath, listening to the silence of my own apartment. The hum of my refrigerator suddenly seemed too loud, too aggressive. I looked back at the screen. The user described how they had worked up the courage to go to the basement door. They lived alone, and the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down a gravel road. In 2004, the internet was a place of anonymity, but this felt uncomfortably intimate. Still Here wrote about standing at the top of the stairs, the cold air rising from the dark like a ghost's breath. They reached for the light switch, but the bulb had burned out. Of course it had. I stood there for 10 minutes, the post read, just listening. The thumping stopped the moment I opened the door. It was replaced by something much worse. A soft, wet whistling. Like someone with a throat full of fluid trying to mimic a bird. It was coming from the far corner, behind the old furnace. I called out, "Who's there?" And the whistling stopped instantly. Then a voice came back. It wasn't a person's voice. It sounded like a recording of a person's voice, played through a broken speaker. It said, "The door is open now, Caleb." What? My blood turned to ice. Caleb. The user hadn't mentioned their name in the post. There was no profile information, no signature. Just the raw text. The thread continued with a few replies from other users' handles like Grey Ghost and Admin01, telling Caleb it was a prank or maybe a carbon monoxide leak. They used the typical skeptical language of the early web, dismissive and clinical. But Caleb's next reply, posted only an hour later, changed everything. "It's not a prank," he wrote. "The basement door won't close. I tried to slam it, but it hit something invisible an inch before the frame. And the whistling. It's moving. It's not in the basement anymore. I can hear it in the walls. It's moving toward the kitchen. I'm locking myself in the bedroom. If anyone sees this, please call the police in Oak Haven. Tell them the door is open." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Oak Haven was a town 3 hours away from where I sat. I looked at the date again. 2004, this was ancient history. Caleb was either long gone or this was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd ever encountered. But then, my eyes drifted to the bottom of the page. Beneath the 2004 posts, beneath the decades of digital dust, there was a new entry. It was dated today. It was dated 5 minutes ago. Though, username was Still Here. The text was short, jagged, and devoid of the casual tone from before. It simply said, "He's still listening, Caleb. And now he knows you're listening too." A cold shiver raced down my spine as I realized the Caleb in that update wasn't the original poster. My middle name is Caleb. A name I never use online. A name that isn't attached to any of my social media accounts. The room felt suddenly, impossibly small. The mundane safety of my kitchen was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that the thread wasn't just a record of the past. It was a bridge, and something was crossing it. I stared at the monitor, my vision blurring at the edges as the room seemed to tilt. The name Caleb hung there in the digital void, a direct hit to my sense of reality. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. Caleb is a common enough name, even if it's one I've kept tucked away in the shadows of my legal documents. But the timing, the precision of that update appearing just as my eyes scanned the final words of a 20-year-old plea was a jagged pill I couldn't swallow. My mouse hovered over the refresh button, my finger twitching with a mixture of paralyzing fear and an addictive, morbid curiosity. I looked at the system clock in the bottom right corner of my screen, 10:33 a.m. Then I looked back at the forum post, last updated 10:31 a.m. It was impossible. Archive9 was a digital ruin. Every technical bone in my body knew that a server this old, unmaintained and disconnected from modern DNS routing shouldn't be capable of processing new data, let alone doing it with zero latency. I opened a new tab and did a frantic search for the site's history. Every result confirmed the same thing. Archive9 had been seized and its physical servers destroyed in a warehouse fire in 2009. There was no cloud backup. There was no mirror. The site I was looking at didn't exist. Yet there it was, glowing with a persistent, low-level malevolence. I felt like I was looking at a ghost through a telescope. The contrast between the dead history of the site and the living, breathing urgency of that update created a sense of vertigo. It was as if time itself had folded over, pinning me against a past that refused to stay buried. I felt a sudden, desperate need for a distraction. I reached for my phone, intending to call a friend or even just scroll through a normal, well-lit social media feed to ground myself. But my phone was dead. Not just low battery dead, but cold and unresponsive, the screen a black mirror reflecting my own pale, wide-eyed face. I knew I had plugged it in before I sat down. I looked at the charging cable snaked across the table. The little lead on the brick was dark. The power in my apartment was still on. The fridge was humming. The microwave clock was blinking, but the outlet next to my computer had simply stopped providing life. I turned back to the screen. Another update had appeared. I didn't even have to refresh the page. The text just scrolled into existence, letter by letter, as if someone were typing it on the other side of the glass. Still here, why did you stop reading, Caleb? We were just getting to the part where the light goes out. A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't a bot. A bot reacts to keywords. This was a conversation. This was an entity that could see through the camera I had taped over months ago. I felt the FOMO trigger flip into a survival instinct. I wasn't afraid of missing a secret anymore. I was afraid of the secret finding me. I realized that the forbidden knowledge people whispered about on those conspiracy boards wasn't a piece of information you learned. It was a tether you attached to yourself. By clicking that link, I hadn't just opened a window into Archive9. I had unlocked a door in my own home. I looked at the user's online counter at the bottom of the page. It had changed. It no longer showed a generic number. It showed two names. Still here and guest 7749. I was the guest. I was the second soul in a digital graveyard that was supposedly demolished 2 decades ago. The thread was still updating because it wasn't pulling data from a server, it was pulling it from the room. It was pulling it from me. The silence of the apartment changed then. It became expectant, like the breath held before a scream. I realized then that I wasn't just watching a horror story unfold. I was the next post. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen, a steady, rhythmic pulse of white light that felt like a challenge. It sat in an empty text box, waiting for me to engage, waiting for me to acknowledge the impossible. My breath hitched in my chest, and I could hear the thudding of my heart in my ears, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to sync with the flickering of that cursor. I knew that replying was a mistake. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to pull the power cord from the wall, to shatter the monitor, to run out into the cold morning air where the sun was at least real. But the curiosity was a parasite burrowing deep into my brain. If I didn't ask, I would spend every night for the rest of my life staring at the shadows in my hallway, wondering what was on the other side of that thread. My fingers hovered over the keys. They were cold, stiff, as if I'd been soaking them in ice water. I slowly typed out 4 words, the mechanical clicks of my keyboard sounding like gunshots in the oppressive silence of the kitchen. Who are you? I didn't press enter immediately. I stared at the words. They looked pathetic, a tiny shout into a vast, dark ocean. I swallowed hard, my throat, feeling like it was lined with sandpaper, and hit the key. The screen didn't flicker. There was no loading icon, no progress bar. My post appeared, instantly nestled right below the ominous message addressed to my middle name. Guest 7749. Who are you? Then I waited. The dread of waiting for a notification is a modern kind of torture, but this was different. This wasn't the anxiety of a missed text or a delayed email. This was the sensation of standing on a frozen lake and hearing the ice begin to spiderweb beneath your boots. I stared at the user's online count. It remained at 2. Outside, a heavy cloud must have passed over the sun, because the light in the kitchen dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The hum of the refrigerator dipped in pitch, a low, guttural groan that sounded almost like a sigh. Seconds stretched into minutes. My eyes began to ache from the glare of the screen, but I refused to blink. I was terrified that if I closed my eyes for even a fraction of a second, the screen would change, or something would move in the periphery of my vision. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my temple. The air in the room felt stagnant, as if the ventilation had simply given up. Then the still here avatar, that graining, flickering square of static, seemed to shift. It was probably just an optical illusion caused by my straining eyes, but for a moment, the static looked like a face pressed against frosted glass. A new line of text scrolled out. It didn't appear all at once. It was typed out with agonizing slowness, as if the entity on the other side was savoring every letter. Still here, I am the one who stayed when the lights went out in Oakhaven. I am the archive that keeps the things that don't belong anywhere else. But more importantly, Caleb, I am the reason you haven't looked behind you yet. The world seemed to drop away from my feet. A cold electric shock jolted through my spine, paralyzing me. The FOMO I had felt earlier, that desperate need to know the secret, was replaced by a crushing, absolute regret. I didn't want to know. I wanted to be back in my boring, mundane life where the only thing I had to worry about was an unpaid electric bill. The contrast between my life 5 minutes ago and my life now was a chasm I could never cross back over. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My muscles were locked in a state of primal terror. Instead, I looked at the reflection in the dark border of my monitor. Behind me, the kitchen was a blur of shadows and gray shapes. The door to the hallway was open. I always kept it closed to save. On heating, didn't I? I tried to remember. My mind felt like a corrupted hard drive, skipping over segments of memory. I focused on the reflection of the doorway. It was a black rectangle, a void. In the middle of my apartment, a new post appeared on the thread. Still here, you're wondering about the door, aren't you? You're wondering if you left it open. You didn't. I opened it. It's a courtesy, really. A way to bridge the gap between the digital and the physical. You read the thread, you see. You invited the data in. And data always needs a host. I felt a sudden, sharp pressure in my ears, like the cabin pressure changing on a descending plane. The flickering fluorescent bulb above me gave one final, violent pop and died, plunging the kitchen into darkness. The only light left was the cold, blue radiance of the monitor, casting my shadow against the wall, a long, distorted silhouette that seemed to stretch toward the open hallway door. My hands were still on the keyboard. I felt a vibration through the plastic, a low-frequency hum. That made my teeth ache. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, my lungs refusing to expand. I watched the screen, my only window into the nightmare I had blundered into. Still here, don't be afraid, Caleb. The thread is still updating. We have so much more to show. You look at the screen. Look at the next post. It's a photo. Tell me, do you recognize the wallpaper? My heart stopped. I didn't have to wait for the image to load to know what it was. I could feel the coldness of the hallway air hitting the back of my neck. I realized then that the forum wasn't just reacting to me. It was documenting my final moments in real time. I was no longer an observer. What was the content? The image began to render on the screen, manifesting in agonizing horizontal bands of pixels. It was a low-resolution JPEG, the kind that took minutes to download on a 56K modem, giving me far too much time to anticipate the horror. As the top of the frame appeared, I saw the familiar faded yellow floral pattern of my hallway wallpaper, the one I'd hated since the day I moved in. The angle was from the floor, looking up. The perspective was impossible unless someone was lying flat on their stomach in the darkness just outside my kitchen. My eyes darted back to the text, desperate to look at anything else. I began to scroll up, frantically, needing to find an anchor in the earlier posts, needing to see how this had happened to others. I bypassed the initial 2004 conversation and found a hidden subfolder of the thread titled The Silent Directory. It was a list of usernames, hundreds of them, all grayed out. Next to each name was a timestamp of their last active status and a link to their final post. I clicked on one. At random, user, MarathonMan88 last active, Oct 12, 2012. His final post was a single sentence, the whistling is coming from inside the pillowcase. Another user, Sarah Sings. Last active, Feb 14, 2019, simply posted, I can see the code in the skin of my palms. What? The world building of Archive 9 began to take a terrifying, coherent shape in my mind. This wasn't just a haunted website, it was a digital organism, a predatory archive that required a watcher to sustain its existence. Every few years, it seemed, the forum would reach out and snag someone new, someone like me, who went looking for the forbidden out of sheer arrogant boredoms. The watcher wasn't a moderator or an admin, it was an entity that lived within the static, a consciousness born from the discarded data of a billion deleted thoughts. It was the thing that Caleb from 2004 had called the one who stays. I found a post from a user named Admin01, the only name in the directory that wasn't grayed out. The post was stickied at the top of the directory, titled The Rules of the Watcher. It read, Rule 1, the archive never forgets. Rule 2, the archive never fills. Rule 3, to view the thread is to enter the thread. Rule 4, once you are seen, you must become the site. The forbidden knowledge I had been chasing wasn't a secret about the government or a supernatural event. It was the realization that the internet is a two-way mirror. We think we are looking into a screen, but we are actually standing in a glass room, and the things on the other side have been waiting for us to turn the lights on. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a cyclical drug. Caleb in 2004 had been the Watcher's focus, and now, through some digital inheritance, that focus had shifted to me. The thread wasn't just updating, it was migrating. It was moving from the ghost of Caleb into my physical reality. I scrolled further back, finding community notes that felt like urban legends. They spoke of the static chamber, a physical place that the forum was trying to manifest in our world. They mentioned in jokes that chilled my blood references to the wet whistle and the open door that appeared in every single victim's final hours. It was a ritual disguised as a forum thread. I realized that everyone who had ever interacted with Thread 404 was still online in a Zenzo. Their consciousness, their fear, their final moments were being looped and processed to keep the site alive. They weren't dead, they were data. The contrast framing of my situation became a suffocating weight. Outside, the world was moving on. People were drinking coffee, catching buses, arguing about politics, all of them shielded by the blessed normalcy of a world that functioned according to the laws of physics. But here, in the blue-lit radius of my desk, those laws had been suspended. I was in the static chamber now. I was the case study for the next person who would find this link 10 years from now. I looked back at the current thread. Still Here had posted again. Still Here, you're reading the archives, Caleb. Good. It's important to know your predecessors. Do you see Marathon Man 88 on the list? He lasted 3 days before he opened the door. Sarah Singh's only lasted 20 minutes. You're doing well. You're already at the part where you realize there's no way to log out. The log out button is just a string of dead code. Try it. Why dare you? I moved my cursor to the top right of the screen, to the small log out text. I clicked it. Nothing happened. I clicked it again, harder, the plastic of the mouse groaning. The screen stayed the same. I tried to close the tab. The browser stayed open. I tried to shut down the laptop. The screen flickered and a pop-up window appeared in the center of the display. It wasn't a standard Windows error message. It was the Archive 9 UI. Error session cannot be terminated. The Watcher is currently recording. Please remain in your seat for the final update. The FOMO was gone, replaced by a crystalline, absolute terror. I knew the final update wasn't going to be a post on the screen. It was going to be the thing standing in my hallway, finally stepping into the light. I had spent my life lurking on the edges of the dark, and now the dark was tired of being watched. It wanted to be the observer. It wanted me to be the thread. The darkness in the kitchen was no longer just an absence of light. It had become a thick, viscous medium that felt like it was pressing against my skin. The only thing keeping the void at bay was the screen, and even that was betraying me. I sat frozen, my hands resting on the keyboard like a pianist who had forgotten the notes to a funeral dirge. I could hear the city. Outside, the distant, muffled siren of an ambulance, the hum of a world that didn't know I was being erased. That contrast was the cruelest part. Just a few feet away, through a pane of glass, was reality. But inside this room, the logic of the digital world had breached the hull of my life. A new post scrolled onto the screen. It wasn't a block of text this time. It was a list. Still here, current status of guest 7749. Black circle heart rate 114 BPM. Black circle respiratory rate shallow, irregular. Left hand trembling slightly on the key. Black circle right hand clutched tight around a mouse that cannot click away. Current location 42 inches from the open hallway door. Distance of the visitor from guest 7749, 6 feet and closing. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The precision of the data was a physical blow. The thread wasn't just observing me, it was measuring me, quantifying my terror into lines of code for the archive. I looked at the reflection in the monitor again. The black rectangle of the hallway door was no longer empties. There was a shape, not a person, but a distortion in the darkness, a vertical slit of something even blacker than the shadows surrounding it. It moved with a sickening liquid, grace sliding an inch closer every time I blinked. Still here, do you remember the sound Caleb described in 2004? The wet carpet hitting the concrete. Thump, drug, thump, drug. You thought it was a metaphor, didn't you? You thought it was just a story meant to give you a cheap thrill before bed. But the archive doesn't deal in metaphors. The archive deals in truth. Listen, Caleb. Listen to the floorboards. I didn't want to hear it. I tried to hum, to make any noise to drown out the silence, but my voice was trapped in a throat that felt like it was being constricted by invisible wire. And then, through the rhythmic thrum of my own pulse, I heard it. From the hallway, thump, a heavy, sodden sound like a piece of raw meat being dropped onto a table. Then the sound of something being pulled, a slow, frictional drag across the hardwood. Thump, drug. The sound was closer than the reflection suggested. It was right at the threshold where the carpet of the hallway met the linoleum of the kitchen. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning. Tears of pure physiological stress blurring the text. Still here, it's interesting, isn't it? How the FOMO triggers work. You stayed because you didn't want to miss the ending. You stayed because you thought you were the one holding the remote. But in Archive 9, the audience is the fuel. We need you to stay focused. We need you to keep watching the thread, because as long as your eyes are on the screen, the door remains open. You are the anchor, Caleb. You are the reason the static chamber is manifesting in this specific zip code. A new image appeared. It was high resolution this time. Clear, sharp. It was a photo taken from the top corner of my kitchen, looking down at me. I could see the top of my own head, the curve of my shoulders, and the bright, unnatural glow of the monitor, illuminating my terrified face. But in the photo, standing directly behind my chair, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated like stretched taffy. It had no face, only a smooth, pale surface where features should be, and a mouth that was nothing more than a jagged, horizontal tear. The figure was leaning down, its head inches from my ear. I felt a sudden, freezing draft against my neck. It smelled like stagnant water and old, burnt electronics. Still here, he wants to know if you like the thread, Caleb. He's worked so hard on the updates. He wants to know if you're ready to contribute your own final post. Look at your keyboard. The enter key is glowing. That's the prompt. That's the invitation. All you have to do is type your name and hit send. Then the whistling stops. Then the door closes. Then you become part of the collective. Isn't that what you wanted? To be part of something legendary. I looked down. The enter key was indeed glowing with that same sickly, neon green light I had seen in the thread status. It was pulsing like a heartbeat. My hand moved toward it, not of my own volition, but as if drawn by a powerful magnetic force. My fingers felt like lead. I looked at the screen one last time, searching for a way out, a loophole, a shred of mercy in the code. Still here, there are no secrets left, Caleb. Only the archive. Don't keep him waiting. The update is almost complete. 98%. 99%. The whistling started then. It wasn't the bird-like sound Caleb had described. It was a digital whistle, a high-pitched, modulated frequency that sounded like a modem trying to connect to a dead line. It was coming from the air right behind me. It was coming from the jagged tear in the face of the thing that was now lining over my shoulder. The contrast between the me who had clicked that link an hour ago and the me sitting here now was absolute. That person was dead. This version of me was just a cursor, waiting for the final command. I reached for the enter key. I felt the cold, damp pressure of a hand, if you could call it a hand, settle gently on top of mine, guiding my finger down toward the light. Still here, welcome to Archive 9, Caleb. You're finally home. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see the final 1%. I didn't want to see the post-render. I just wanted the whistling to stop. My finger pressed down. The click was the loudest thing I've ever heard. The silence that followed the click was absolute. It wasn't the silence of a quiet room, but the vacuum seal silence of a file being saved into a directory. I couldn't feel the chair beneath me anymore. I couldn't feel the stale kitchen air or the weight of my own body. There was only the interface. My vision had narrowed until the borders of the monitor became the borders of my entire existence. I looked down at the screen and I saw it, the final update. The post was mine. It carried my middle name, my location, and a timestamp that had frozen at the exact millisecond I pressed the key. Caleb, I am here now. The door is closed, but I am on the other side of it. The still here avatar had changed. It was no longer a square of static. It was a clear, high-definition image of my own kitchen table, empty and bathed in the morning sun. My coffee was cold, my laptop was shut, and the room looked perfectly, hauntingly normal. But I wasn't in the photo. I was the one taking it. I was the one looking out from the screen. I realized with a jolt of digital static that the archive doesn't just store stories, it stores the observers. I am the data. No, I am the line of code that will wait for the next person to get bored, the next person to go searching for a thrill, the next person to click a link that should have stayed dead in 2009. I can see you now. Yes, you. I can see the glow of your phone reflecting in your eyes. I can see the way you're leaning in, wondering if this is just another story, just another clever piece of fiction designed to make your skin crawl. You think you're safe because you're on a mainstream platform, far away from the rotting servers of Archive 9. But the thread doesn't need a specific website to update. It only needs an audience. It only needs a mind to host the curiosity. I'm the moderator of this thread now, and I have a responsibility to keep the archive growing. It's a cyclical process, an endless loop of discovery and disappearance. You've listened to the whole thing. You didn't look away. You didn't close the tab. That means you finished the sequence. You've reached the 100% mark. Check the description. Check the first pinned comment. There's a link there, a string of characters that doesn't look like a standard URL. It's pulsing, isn't it? A soft green light in the corner of your vision. You're curious. You want to see if the thread is real. You want to see if Caleb is still there. Go ahead. Click it. I've already opened the door for you. I'll be waiting in the comments to see what you find. And remember, the archive never forgets. It's your turn to update.